Well, good morning, brethren, and happy Sabbath to you for this AM service to the U.S., PM to the U.K. for the 6th day of April 2019 on the pagan Roman calendar. It is the first day of the first month of a new year on God's holy sacred calendar. So, Happy New Year. I don't know how to say that in Hebrew, but, it is a Sabbath, so Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath to everyone, and as I said, this is AM to the U.S., PM to the U.K. I'm kind of waking up as maybe you are if you're especially in the U.S. for this early hour, and I know we're about 15, 20 minutes later than the time I have set for the morning service in the U.S. I was up till 3 o'clock last night, though. I got 6 hours sleep, got up at 9 o'clock this morning, Central Time, and read in here and threw on all the switches and then said, wow, I spent some time praying last night, asking God to guide me what to have this morning. We have a sermon from Mr. Armstrong. That was kind of a quick answer. Last night, I had done the same thing, but I'd been praying all week that God would guide me. And I turned on the switches last night to be on time with the Bible study, and I had nothing from Mr. Armstrong to play, and I had no idea what I was going to say. But God was putting it in my head, I'll speak through you, just turn on the switches and go live. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And, you always wonder when you don't have anything planned ahead, wow, am I going to have enough to cover it? And I went 20 extra minutes last night speaking under what I believe was strong inspiration. If you didn't see the Bible study last night, it's almost 2 hours. It's an hour and 50 minutes. Normally Bible study would only be 90 minutes. Sabbath services are 2 hours, and we went almost 2 hours. So last night's Bible study would make a good Sabbath service for you. And the subject is a good one for before Passover, relating how where we are in prophecy right now at this moment relates to the upcoming Passover and the days of unleavened bread. So if you missed the Bible, if you haven't seen the Bible study last night, it's in the archive on the Facebook Live Sabbath Service page. It's also on YouTube. I stayed up and made sure those got archived and indexed last night. And then I watched a sermon. Well, I should rephrase it. I watched excerpts from a sermon that someone had put together on YouTube. Unfortunately, it wasn't the whole sermon. It was just excerpts taken from this sermon and that sermon, and it had music underneath it. But I spent some time last night, early this morning, trying to find that particular sermon in which Mr. Armstrong said a few things. I'll tell you what he said. And by next Friday night's Bible study, I'm going to make a diligent effort to find that particular sermon that Mr. Armstrong gave, probably in 1985. His voice sounded like that time period that I remember when he was, he was wearing down before he died. He was wearing down physically, but spiritually he was stronger than ever. And some of the things he said in that sermon, it was like, wow, I hadn't really, if I caught this before, it kind of went in my one ear and out the other type of thing. Maybe you've done that, But what he said that was very prominent, that I want to find that sermon and play by next Friday night Bible study for you. He said he explained the words. Wait a minute, I made some notes over here. Let me grab my note paper. I grabbed an envelope and just made some notes as I saw him saying this in this video while I was watching about 2 a.m. this morning. He said, that is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. There's let me say good morning to you before I go there, and tell you where we're going this morning. As I kind of wake up and you kind of wake up. I had to just throw the switch. Some of you that expect that I've done something you asked me to do to let you know before I go live, I'll write several of you and say, I'll be going on in a couple of minutes, either on World Watch TV News or, on the Sabbath service. I didn't have time to do that last night, and I didn't, and still be on time, and I didn't have time to do that this morning. I was already late, and that would have just made me later. After being up to 3 a.m. this morning. I got 6 hours sleep, so I feel okay. I'll look forward to taking a little nap for a little bit this afternoon, though, after this morning service, sometime after this morning service. But I want to mention and I'm hoping those people who I didn't notify and say, hey, I'm going on in a few minutes, how you can do something, those of you that watch on Facebook Live, that we'll let you know when we go live. Some of you know this already and probably have done this. But if you go to the Sabbath service page and then look for the like button and either right-click it or down arrow it, whatever it works on, however it works on your particular device, and look for the menu under the like button that will open up when you're highlighting it or right-clicking it or one or the other. You'll see a drop-down menu that offers you an opportunity to put a checkbox under the word notification. And if you'll do that, Facebook will then notify you when we've hit the live button and say, hey, there's a live video stream going now. And I'll check that for you and with you later. Let me see if I can just quickly see if those people I usually notify, if somehow if you made it. All right, hello to Jameson Woody. I see you online out there. And I know some of you watch from the archive anyway, and that's fine, because the archive, when you play it, you can't tell the difference between live and playing a recording. The recordings are so good. But happy Sabbath morning to you, whether you're watching live or watching later in the archive. And I get up and do this at 9:30 because of requests from brethren in the UK that I get this on so that brethren there who watch can see it before the Sabbath is over, before the sun goes down on the Sabbath. And this puts us on at 2:30 p.m., 2:30 in the afternoon, which was the time we started services at headquarters in Pasadena each week, which is that's a great time for you in the UK. But for us in the U.S., for some of it's a little early. I got that backward last night. As I was saying, that would be a good time on the East Coast. Actually, on the East Coast, it's later. Instead of being 8:30, well, I was actually saying it the other way. It's a good time on the West Coast. But on the West Coast, it's earlier on the clock there. So 9:30 would be 7:30 in the morning. That's a little early for people on the West Coast. So, that it's in the archive for watching it later there on the West Coast. It's a good time for people on the East Coast. I'd mentioned it backwards, and it's last night. It's actually later on the clock. It's 10:30 a.m. on the East Coast. That's not too bad. That's the time the morning service in Pasadena at the auditorium would begin, 10:30 a.m. We had an a.m. service and a p.m. service. They were two different congregations, but some few people would go to both. And Mr. Armstrong would watch the a.m. service before he would speak in the p.m. service. And because he would often make reference to a sermon or sermonette from the a.m. service, I thought, well, as long as they allow, people that are not assigned to that congregation, as long as they would allow people to go, I often went to the morning service and then would come again to the service I was assigned to, the afternoon p.m. headquarters service, where I had duties and ushering and things as part of the congregation that I was assigned to do, and so I'd go to both. But All right, good morning. Hope we're waking up. But the point is, those of you that I didn't notify, I hope you'll find this. And if you find it later when maybe I say, hey, I was on, I'm sorry I didn't let you know, go watch it in the archive. I hope you'll go figure out from our Sabbath service page, find the like button, figure out how to get the menu to open up that says notification. That's under the like button. Find that notification menu box and check it. You know, click it, whatever you have to do to make the check mark come into the box on notification, and then you'll get notice when we hit the live stream. So if I were to be a few minutes late because I stayed up late, or if I for some reason signed on early, something urgent going on or whatever, you just get notice that, hey, there's a live stream here. You know, if you want to stay with us watching, you know, you might find it good to get notice. All right, but now here's what the sermon that I'm looking for that Mr. Armstrong said last night, and I do have for you, I've stayed up to line that up. I've got Mr. Robert Collins, 50-year minister when he was 77 years old, explaining what to have in the room with you for Passover. And I even found that's him right there in the video. I'll use that like a sermonette before Mr. Armstrong speaks, with Mr. Collins explaining what to have in your room for Passover. You know, if you're doing it at home, whether you tune in with us here or whether you, as head of household, conduct the Passover yourself. Mr. Collins' explanation of what you need to have in the room and how to have the room prepared ahead of time is very helpful. I kind of reiterated that last night. I left out one important thing, as I mentioned what you'd need for the foot washing, you know, your tub and some warm water. You'll want a nice clean towel, because after you wash someone's feet, you know, everybody wants to have their own towel. You don't want to leave people's feet wet before you have to put your socks and shoes back on. So a towel, that'll be important to have. But he'll cover that when we get to that. And then I found also, I've got a chart there that summarizes what Mr. Collins goes through about what you need to have in your room, having your room all set up and ready for Passover. But we will come back to that in a moment. When we get to Mr. Armstrong's sermon this morning, well, I've got one that he gave right around Passover time and Days of Unleavened Bread that will be good make-ready for Passover coming up. Now, this is the first day of the first month, brand new year, and being the first day of the first month, we're now into a less than 2-week countdown, just 13 days to the, am I counting that right? 1 from 14 leaves 13. Well, just 13 days away from the Passover, which will be after sunset on Thursday, April 18. So the evening of Thursday, April 18, will be the 14th day of the first month on God's holy sacred calendar for this new year, for the first feast day of the year, the most solemn feast day of the whole year, the Passover foot washing memorial. And a Passover memorial where we do the foot washing service. But a sermon I want to find for you by next Friday night Bible study, God help me find that, is one in which this excerpt I heard last night, let me just tell you, because that's kind of exciting, where Mr. Armstrong was saying, that is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. Now that's kind of exciting to me because Mr. Armstrong's assistant, who helped him in his travels, helped him as Mr. Armstrong in his last year, 1985, was writing a very helpful book entitled Mystery of the Ages. I say helpful. He himself said, look, it's not the Bible, but because God wrote the Bible like a jigsaw puzzle, Mystery of the Ages summarizes all that God gave to us through his end-time apostle and servant, Mr. Armstrong, who he used to help us find the line by line, precept upon precept. He helped us understand how to put the jigsaw puzzle together. through Mr. Armstrong, God just took the mystery out of the Bible for us. You know, and as Christ explained to his disciples when they asked him, why are you always speaking in parables? And Christ explained, well, for you it's given to understand, so to you guys I explain what the parables mean. But for the public, it's not given for them to understand. So the parables are to hide it until God calls each person. And for the majority, God will not be calling them until the fall harvest. You know, God uses the agricultural season to explain the big thing he's doing with salvation, which is there's a spring harvest, a fall harvest. The spring harvest in the beginning of the year is a small, much smaller harvest than the later, greater, after summertime crops are growing all summer. You know, the crops don't grow in the fall and the winter, except some few, you know, winter-type vegetation will grow. But for the most part, most vegetation grows in the warm months, spring and summer. And so the harvest in the fall, after the whole summer growth, is a huge harvest. And God uses as an analogy, he uses how the agricultural season works to explain how he's only calling a few for this early harvest, the spring harvest, you know, for being part of the first resurrection and marrying Christ, helping him through the millennium, helping him even now with what he's doing. And now Mr. Armstrong explained in that late sermon something that Aaron Dean wrote for him, as Aaron explained in one email when people asked him about Mr. Armstrong's comment in that last letter that he wrote before he died and dated 1986, that Aaron says, well, I dictated that for Mr. Armstrong. I read it to him, and he squeezed my hand saying, thumbs up, yeah, that's okay. You know, I'm with you on that, and even recommended just a few changes in the letter. And he could have changed that part if he hadn't been with it. So Aaron's reference that he helped Mr. Armstrong with that shouldn't be taken too far. And the part of that letter I'm referring to is when Aaron says, there's still a great work that lies ahead to be done. Well, before Mr. Armstrong died, in one of his sermons, he explains what that great job that still lies ahead to be done. He used those same words that Aaron penned for him in the letter under Mr. Armstrong's name while Mr. Armstrong was still alive, that went out saying there's a great work that still lies ahead to be done. Well, we're not without clue as to what that great job that still lies ahead to be done was, because he said it in a sermon where he was pouring out his heart to brethren in a large assembly. It was probably during one of the feasts that he was doing that, probably in the latter feast, in one of the Feast of Tabernacles. I believe I can find that sermon. In fact, I believe just before I signed on, I may have found it, but I didn't get a chance to listen to it. I want to be sure I have an accurate transcript to roll online with it, because our closed caption device that works while we're live, dynamically typing in the words like you can see here below, it does pretty good on me, but some of Mr. Armstrong's tapes, we're training it for Mr. Armstrong's voice, but it's not always 100%. I'll be training it this morning from a sermon tape we're going to hear when Mr. Armstrong speaks. But I want to find the actual transcript, which I may have to type up myself this week, but you know, I'll work on that. From the sermon that includes this comment by Mr. Armstrong, that is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you what Mr. Armstrong said in a moment, that of what he explained is the great job. It is not, like I was saying in the Bible study last night, that great job that lies ahead to be done is not a repeat by this little group and that little group, or maybe even this major group and that major group, that have flocked together under some vanity plate, blankety-blank, banana-peeling Church of God named group, in an effort to repeat what God did through Mr. Armstrong, which God has preserved on the internet, and makes the writings and publications and his Bible studies and sermons more available now than they were when Mr. Armstrong was alive. Because when he was alive, you either had to come to the Bible study or the Sabbath service, or somehow out in the field areas receive a cassette tape of it if you wanted Bible study or sermon. And for radio broadcasts, well, you could tune into those daily, but you'd get the particular broadcast that headquarters had assigned for that day, or that Mr. Armstrong had done for that day. And on the telecast, you'd only get one of those per week at a certain given time of a local television station broadcasting it. Otherwise, what's available now on the internet was not so readily available while Mr. Armstrong was alive. Now that God has opened up a new door called the World Wide Web, the internet, people can get on these search engines like Bing or Google, and there's others, Dogpile and Yahoo. A lot of them let you do a search, and on any of them, they're all indexed in a certain way that will find the publications and the broadcast and the Bible studies and the sermons by Mr. Armstrong galore, thanks to a lot of people having loaded them up on YouTube and Vimeo and other services where you can have things preserved and recorded and accessible by people. And so that whole scenario is a situation where God has continued the work he did through Mr. Armstrong more so than when Mr. Armstrong was alive, because of the incredible availability. I mean, you could sit around all day long for a whole year listening to sermons and broadcast, both radio and television, by Mr. Armstrong, and by the end of the year not have heard everything so that he did. So, and somehow you did hear it all, you'd start, by the end of the year, you'd want to start over again, because it won't be fresh anymore, what you listened to a whole year ago. Point is, nobody needs to duplicate. In fact, nobody can do it as good as God did it through Mr. Armstrong. So these little group or bigger group efforts to replicate what God did through Mr. Armstrong, we'll just copy the way he did it and keep going what was being done then, it's over, friends. I mean, in that video I was watching last night, they took excerpts. Maybe it's in the same sermon, maybe not. I'll find that out as I work on that this week. But they took excerpts that say, God will keep me alive until the work he called me to do is done. And he even said, once God lets me die, the work he called me to do has been done. Doesn't need to be replicated. Now, God will do going before kings and princes again. He says so, I think it's Revelation 10. But that's right before he talks about who he's going to do it through in Revelation 11, that talks about the two witnesses that are not here yet, that God may be grooming now, but that he will bring forward when the fifth seal opens up, when the Great Tribulation begins, when those of the Philadelphia era who are accounted worthy to escape are taken to a place of nourishment and protection. We went through that pretty much last night. I hope you'll go back. If you didn't hear the Bible study last night, go back and listen, because I was wide awake. God was inspiring my words to cover the details about that in a way that I believe very helpful to you. But Revelation 11 tells us those two witnesses will have certain powers. And so those people running around right now claiming to be the two witnesses, and there's more than two, by the way. There's several groups of two claiming to be the two witnesses now. Well, just ask them, look in Revelation 11 and find some of the powers that God says that he gives to those two candlesticks, those two olive branches. Excuse me. And when he announces their title, the title comes with these powers. Verse 4 of Revelation 11, these are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must be in this manner be killed. That's not just some crazy, wild, fanatic symbolism. God actually explains that is a situation where the enemies of these men will be killed by fire proceeding out of their mouth. These have power, verse 6, to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. So those people running around claiming to be the two witnesses now, can they shut the heaven, stop the rain? No, we have drought. We have floods going all over the place right now. And they have power over the waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will, the old plagues of Egypt. But verse 6 right there, the part that says they can turn water into blood, that'd be a nice, easy test for, those of you that are trying to promote these men and saying, yeah, look, these two witnesses are here. Balderdash. Take a glass of water or a bottle of water with you to those guys, those of you that are seeing these people in person, and say, hey, how about a little small, easy proof that you are one of the two witnesses? God says these two witnesses have power to change water to blood. Would you mind, sir, just changing this bottle of water to blood just to prove, you got the power, God says. And if you're able to be in front of these men claiming that, just ask them a simple, easy proof. Take a bottle of water with you. Say, change that to blood. They can't do that. They're not one of the two witnesses. And I mean, look, I wouldn't even attempt to try such a thing. If the time has not come for it and God has not made a person one of the two witnesses, I can't even find the word that describes how obnoxious and how arrogant and out of place that is, and how crazy that people can be deceived by people just saying they are one of the two witnesses when they're not, and when they don't have these powers God gives the two witnesses. And it's totally outside the timing. I mean, we won't even be here where we are presently at the moment at the time the two witnesses begin their work. Those who are accounted worthy to escape will have been flown symbolically two wings of a great eagle, probably modern jet aircraft, to the place in the wilderness, which God describes will most likely be the place described in Daniel 11:41, because it's the only place the Bible mentions that's protected from the beast during the Great Tribulation. So God's telling you, this place that's protected from the beast, it's a wilderness place, and you're flown on two wings of a great eagle to the wilderness. You have to flee when an army surrounds Jerusalem to the mountains. We're probably flown into Israel somewhere first, and then that army, after one surrounds Jerusalem, part of that army or some other army that Satan drafts up is going to become upset with God's people and chase us as we flee to the mountains. And the mountain range is across the Jordan River on the east side of the Jordan River, where Jordan is, at Petra, which is an entranceway, big rocked up walls with a narrow entranceway that reminded Mr. Armstrong of the gelled up walls of the Red Sea, when ancient Israel under Moses was fleeing from Egypt, and Pharaoh had sent his army out to bring them back. He had changed his mind about letting them go. I'm going to bring them people back. And so in his arrogance, Pharaoh had his army chase Moses and the Israelites of that day through the Red Sea, and God let Israel get safely on the other side, and then had the gelled up walls melt back and come crashing down on Pharaoh's army. Similar to that, as Mr. Armstrong saw the walls, rock walls in Petra, and a narrow passageway, relatively narrow passageway, reminded of that scenario I just described with Moses and Pharaoh's army chasing ancient Israel. And Revelation 12 describes how Satan will send out a flood, an army, to chase the end-time spiritual Israel, the portion of the church who is accounted worthy to escape. He'll chase us through those rock walls of Petra, and God will then, as he says in verse 16 of Revelation 12, open up the earth, big sinkhole, swallow Satan's army that he sends after those accounted worthy to escape. You know, probably an earthquake, that opens up the ground, and then those rock walls fall in on the army after God has gotten those of the true church who are accounted worthy to escape, those of the Philadelphia era, after he's gotten them into a place of protection, nourishment, safety, final training. Now, those who are not accounted worthy to escape, but who are part of the true church, those who are the remnant of her seed, of the seed of the church, who were with us in the Philadelphia era, but they had a Laodicean attitude. They thought they had it made. They were keeping all the commandments, as Revelation 12:17 says, and I went over that last night to help straighten out that deacon that was giving that sermon saying, well, the Laodiceans that are left behind were not keeping God's commandments. Well, actually, he didn't say probably. He just outright said they were not keeping God's commandments. Well, that man was not familiar with the Bible, not fully familiar, because verse 17 of Revelation 12 says expressly, explicitly, plainly, clearly, those of the remnant, who are the remnant, those who are left behind of the seed of the church, who keep the commandments of God. It says they keep the commandments. And that tells you, okay, but then if they were keeping the commandments, how is it God considered them lukewarm? Well, poor and blind and miserable and naked, because they weren't also keeping the instructions of Jesus Christ in Luke 21:36. You may say, Stephen, how can you focus on that verse for the difference between being accounted worthy to escape or being left behind as part of the remnant of the seed of the true church who God considered lukewarm and not able to escape? Well, very simply, the beginning two parts of Luke 21:36, God reveals them as if they were prerequisites, things that you have to do in order to qualify to be accounted worthy to escape. And if you don't do them, you're disqualified from being accounted worthy to escape, also from being accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man in the first resurrection. It says that at the end of the verse 36 and of Luke 21. So, God's telling you, watch and pray always so that you may be accounted worthy to escape and so that you may be accounted worthy to stand before the Son of Man. That's all part of that verse, 36, Luke 21. So those are your prerequisites for being accounted worthy. So even though those of the Philadelphia era who were lukewarm, and then when the Laodicean era begins, because they had a Laodicean attitude now, they form and become part of that era when that era commences, which does not commence as God's apostle has explained. So we're holding fast, teaching as we were taught. Mr. Armstrong said the era formally commences after the Great Tribulation begins and after Philadelphia is taken away to a place of nourishment, protection, safety, final training. So that's straight from the apostle. And that fits Scripture, because verse 18 of Revelation 3, in the 9 verses that directly address the Laodicean era, explains that it's an era of martyrdom. If you get to verse 18, there's 4 verses before it that say the people themselves, they think they got it made in the shade, but they're lacking something. They're poor and blind and miserable and naked. But they think they're rich because they got good jobs, they go to the best feast sites, they keep all the commandments. But they ignore Jesus Christ's instruction in Luke 4:4 that tells us we live not by bread alone, but by every word of Christ, of God, every word of God, including the words of Christ in Luke 21, verse 36, where Christ instructed us to watch the seals he was just explaining in plain language in Luke 21. There's only 4 of them active, so when he says watch, you watch the ones that are active, the first 4 that are basically the daily news every day, but only parts of the news that apply to false religion, war, famine, disease epidemics, death by wild animals, death by seismic activity, those first 4 active seals, and death by mobs and sedition and roiling waters and trouble that's part of the general trouble that leads up to, but is not part of, the mega trouble Christ described as the 5th seal, rendered as great tribulation in the King James Version of the Bible, which is the next major event in prophecy that'll be happening according to the words of God's end-time apostle, Mr. Armstrong. The next major event in prophecy is the 5th seal, Great Tribulation, which Christ described in Matthew 24, verse 21, as the worst time of trouble to come on this earth since the beginning of the world, to this time coming just ahead of us, sooner than later, and no nor ever after, no time after it shall ever be as bad as what is coming in the next major event in prophecy, the 5th seal, Great Tribulation. God says you can escape it if you're doing the prerequisites of Luke 21:36. Brethren, I hope my summary this morning, does that put it together for you? I hope so. And, because that's what the bride needs to be doing today. And that relates to exactly what Mr. Armstrong said. I'm wanting to get to Mr. Collins explaining the what to do for Passover, and then save the exact thing he said is that is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. It is not some group of people under some certain ministers, either elected or self-appointed, who try to replicate the work that God did through Mr. Armstrong, which God has, people are you loony or what? Trying to replicate the work God did through Mr. Armstrong when God preserved it and makes it available. There's nothing that's clamped it down and keeping people from being able to have access to the actual writings of Mr. Armstrong or his speaking, which have been made part of the public domain. And so, and God's got this new open door, internet, that makes them so available. There's not a need to replicate it, and you cannot do it as good. I'm sorry, folks. I'm not sorry. God, had a special friendship with Mr. Armstrong, who proved himself to every time humble himself, even with the big test of Pentecost, where for 40 years we kept it on a day other than counting it from the morrow, beginning with the morrow after the Sabbath during Days of Unleavened Bread, beginning with the wave sheaf day, and counting 50. Of that 40 years, the first 2 or 3 years, Mr. Armstrong was keeping it like the Jewish people do by observing Pentecost on Sivan 6 every year, because the Jewish people, they mark that on the Jewish calendars as Pentecost, counting it from the first day of unleavened bread, from the annual Sabbath during the Days of Unleavened Bread. Well, you don't need to count it every year if you do it that way, you just count it one time and you say that comes out Sivan 6, Sivan 6, and that's it for them. No more counting. They counted it one time, and Sivan 6 always comes out 50 days from the first day of unleavened bread on the same date on the Holy Day calendar every year. On the Holy Sacred calendar every year comes out Sivan 6. But that's not the way God said do it. He said count it from the morrow after a weekly Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread. That also makes the wave sheaf day be the wrong day for those people using the Jewish calendar for the wave sheaf day. They'll always have it be on the 16th day of the first month, because the first day of unleavened bread is always the 15th day of the first month. Passover is the 14th. The following day at sunset, when we do the night to be much observed, which this year will be Friday night, April 19. That's the 15th. At sunset, that begins the 15th. On Friday night, April 19, that begins the 15th day of the first month, the first day of unleavened bread. Then the Jewish people, on the 16th day of the first month, do the wave sheaf day, regardless of what day of the week that falls, because they're doing it the morrow after the annual Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread. The first annual Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread, that first day is always of unleavened bread is always the 15th of the first month. Comes the day after Passover. And so the wave sheaf day, for the Jewish people doing it as they do the wave sheaf offering the day after the annual Sabbath of the 15th, so that makes the wave sheaf always the 16th day of the first month. This year, the 16th, this year that would happen to make it work out to be sunset begins Saturday night and Sunday. It happens to make it work out to be a Sunday this year as the 16th of the first month. But next year, it'll be different. You know, if you look at this calendar, I've got the holy days plotted out through 2034. We printed through 2024 on this little business size card. But in 2020, next year, I don't say what day of the week on this calendar April 8 of 2020 would be, but it'll be different. It'll be wave sheaf day will be a different day. Well, not the wave sheaf day, but the 16th of the first month will be a day different than Sunday next year, as it was, I think, last year also. But the Jewish people, they disregard that. They've got this idea that the wave sheaf should be the morrow after the annual Sabbath. But God inspired Mr. Armstrong to eventually understand that has to be the morrow after a weekly Sabbath. And so he understood that early on, but then he was counting like the Bible says do from. But that word from shouldn't be in verse 15 of Leviticus 23. So God straightened that out. And the point is, as we had this test, 40 years indicates trial and testing. So we had this 40 years of doing it other than the way God described it to be done in the original text, which eventually God caused Mr. Armstrong to see there's an error in the translation in the King James and in all your modern translations where they've added the word from instead of using a preposition like beginning with, because prepositions aren't in the Hebrew text, so the translators added it, but they added it without proper understanding. God eventually corrected that after letting us be tested. Okay, now, that's not my major point. That's just a side point. After we watch Mr. Collins explain what you need to have for Passover, I'm going to, as we introduce Mr. Armstrong for the sermon he'll be giving today, I'll explain just briefly, and I'm going to find that sermon where you'll hear him do it himself. I'm going to try to find that sermon this week and have it for next Friday night's Bible study, where he says, that is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. I'll go ahead and tell you what he said that is. Some of you may have heard that sermon. You may already know. It is not, like I said, repeating the special work God did through Mr. Armstrong of taking the gospel to the world and taking it before kings and princes. That is the thing he's going to repeat with the two witnesses. But right now, Mr. Armstrong explained for us the thing that needs to be done for the church is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. It's for the church. We'll talk about it right after we hear Mr. Collins give kind of a little sermonette explaining what you need to do to have your room set up, whether you are conducting it yourself as head of household or if you're tuning in with us from your home. Here's what you'll need to have in your home and how to have it set up ahead of time for Thursday evening, April 18, Thursday evening, April 18, for the Passover foot washing memorial service. Let's go to Mr. Collins and let him explain that.
Set up the room in which you will observe the Passover memorial ahead of time. It should be very neat and clean, and you should have a towel and small wash basin and a couple of cups of warm water for each person participating in the foot washing. You should also have a small amount of unleavened bread and very small glasses of wine, one for each person, with no more than a tablespoon of wine in each small glass, prepared on a tray or table, and these should be covered with an immaculate.
Okay, and friends, the video cut off right where he was saying, and it needs to be covered with an immaculate white napkin. Nice cloth one if you have it, but if you don't have that, you can get beautiful paper white napkins, immaculate white napkins, to cover your unleavened bread, which is not broken ahead of time before the service. You leave the sheets of unleavened bread crackers, you leave them whole sheets on the plate, and then during the Passover service, when that section of taking the bread begins, then whoever's conducting the service, the head of household there, will break that bread. And even if you tune in with us, you'll break that bread during that section when we do that early, right after the foot washing service, right after the foot washing part of the service. Then we go to the breaking of the bread, and you break the bread during the service, and then each person present will take a small piece and symbolically be consuming, eating Christ's body, partaking of his body. And then you have another white napkin to cover up your small glasses of just plain ordinary red wine, 10 to 12% ideally. You start getting 13% and above, they start getting sugary sweet, and we don't want a dessert wine for Passover. It should be a plain red wine. And those should be poured out ahead of time. Your wine should already be poured in the little glasses, excuse me, ahead of time, not more than a tablespoon of wine per glass. And you cover those with an immaculate white napkin. Then for that section, everything's ready to go. You take your napkin off. Everybody takes a, excuse me, a small glass and drinks the wine symbolizing Christ's blood. And be sure for the foot washing part that begins in the service, you have a towel for each person. And then we'll sing a hymn at the end, and that's the foot washing, the most solemn ceremony of the whole year. Okay, now we got to go to Mr. Armstrong. I got a sermon from him this morning for us, but here's a quick look at what you need, summarized on a graphic here on a slide. Room set up very neat and clean. Have a towel and small wash basin, and a couple of cups of water, warm water, not ice cold. Have a small amount of unleavened bread, unbroken. We'll break it during the service. Have a small amount of wine, no more than a tablespoon per small glass. Cover each with a white napkin, immaculate white napkin. All right, that's what you need to have in your room ahead of time. Kind of simple. Okay, now, what is it that Mr. Armstrong was saying you would, that the, that the great job that still lies ahead to be done? What is that? Like I said, I'm going to find the sermon in which he says it's making the church ready. It's preparing the bride for Christ's return. And as he said in that sermon, I hope to find for you and play, he said it makes him very, excuse me, it said it makes him very sad that the church, this is while Mr. Armstrong was alive. I believe this would have been 1985, Mr. Armstrong, that you were saying this, I'm pretty sure. He said he's sad that, you know, he said it was part of his job to make the church ready for Christ's return. He said, I've done a poor job in that. The church is corrupt. And what were the exact word beside corrupt he used? I didn't get that down, but he said it's corrupt and something else. It's not. He said the church is not ready. He said the church is the spiritual temple. The church is not ready yet. That was back when he was still alive. Not ready yet for Christ's return. He said the great job is to stir up this church and get this church ready for Christ's coming. Now, in doing that, the church doesn't need to be sidetracked by trying to play like it's doing Mr. Armstrong's job, the job that God gave Mr. Armstrong to do. That is finished, as Mr. Armstrong himself said. When I die, he said, God won't let me die before the job he gave me to do is finished. He said, when I die, that part of the work is done. So those out there wasting time, effort, and money trying to replicate it, and you can see no one has been invited before kings and princes, and even before the world, what they're offering and remanufacturing Mr. Armstrong's booklets and trying to redo his broadcast. One old guy out there sounds so boring. I pray and ask God, please don't let me be boring like that guy is. You know, but I'm not trying to do the same thing he's doing anyway. I'm not trying to take the gospel to the world because God's done that through Mr. Armstrong and has preserved that with Mr. Armstrong. The job for us is stirring up the church and getting this church ready for Christ's coming. That's why God has delayed things. Mr. Armstrong says very clearly, I got to find that sermon for you. He said, brethren, this church is corrupt, and the other word, I wish I need to go back and get that. But where Aaron Dean wrote for Mr. Armstrong in the last letter under Mr. Armstrong's name, a great work still lies ahead to be done. Mr. Armstrong explained while he was alive, with his own lips saying it, that a certain thing, making the church ready, is the great job that still lies ahead to be done. Thank you, Father. Boom, we've got that from Mr. Armstrong's own lips in a sermon, in a recorded sermon. All right, we'll get to that. Now, what we're going to have this morning, I'll get to that this week. But when I saw that last night, friends, that had me staying up praying a long time. That's why I was up late last night, because that was exciting to see that, hey, that's what Mr. Armstrong, when Aaron wrote that, whether Aaron remembered Mr. Armstrong's sermon or not, I think God inspired it with Aaron's help for Mr. Armstrong, and Mr. Armstrong squeezing Aaron's hand saying, yeah, that's good. Make a few certain changes and let that roll out. That's good. Mr. Armstrong had it fully in mind, even though Aaron Dean may not have understood it all himself. As Aaron wrote the words, a great job still lies ahead to be done. As Aaron explained why he was putting that there, was to encourage people that, you know, we don't just lay down now and go to sleep. There's still a great work that needs to be done. And yes, what that is, whether Aaron understood it or not, Mr. Armstrong did. He had already explained it in a sermon that, boom, I saw a reference from last night. Whoever found that and put it in the video, rah, rah, good job for you. Although you may not fully understand how it all comes together, because that same video, I wouldn't play it for you because they say we're now in the Laodicean era. So, you know, some people find this little tidbit and that little tidbit. We have to hold fast on everything, teach as we taught. Mr. Armstrong taught us that Laodicean era, as an era, does not formally, officially commence until those accounted worthy in the Philadelphia era are taken to a place of protection, nourishment, safety, final training. And after the Great Tribulation begins, the fifth seal opens up. That's when the era as an era begins, and it's an era of martyrdom, as the direct verses describing the Laodicean era explain in verse 18, where God counsels those who are in that era, left behind. That era doesn't begin until people are left behind who had a Laodicean attitude, which they could change any time between now and up to the moment when the fifth seal opens up. If you've got a Laodicean attitude now, thinking you got it made, and you're not following Christ's instruction to watch and pray always, takes a big effort, you can still change it and start making that effort, and then be accounted worthy to escape the worst time of trouble to ever hit this earth coming ahead of us. Worse than rounds 1 and 2 of World War by far. A more vigorous persecution of true Christians who keep the Sabbath and who would refuse to bow down before the image of the beast, or they'll kill you. Or the beast, the false prophet, will announce you as a Judaizer and anathema to the Catholic Church, and those so announced, the beast, the Roman government, will kill you. The new revived Roman government is coming. It's part of those two legs that were part of that statue of Daniel 2 that comes down to the 10 toes of iron and clay mixed together. That is the current time today, just ahead of us, when there will be 10 leaders that the United States of Europe will be narrowed and whittled down to. That probably that EU will somehow boil around to 10 leaders. They'll re-border countries, or all of Israel will go out. However God works it to be done, we'll see it come out, and it might be sudden and swift. All of a sudden there's just 10 leaders, and they give their power to one dictator who will be crowned in a coronation ceremony, most likely a repetition of history. It'll be done in Frankfurt, Germany, in the Kaiser's Hall, the Emperor's Hall, conducted by a pope who's always done it in the past, holding the coronation ceremony, crowning the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He's done that in the past through Justinian, through Napoleon. Even though Napoleon grabbed the crown out of the Pope's hands, the Pope was there to conduct that ceremony. And he did it by remote for Mussolini, gave Mussolini a writing, a concordant. That's the only exception to actually doing it. So we'll have to watch. But it may be a repetition of history. It may be a big deal on the news. All of a sudden there's this crowning of a new emperor for the revived Holy Roman Empire being done in Frankfurt, Germany, and it's on worldwide television news. And then, boom, the fifth seal will have opened and begun. And God will have those eagles, two, great eagles, flying people on their two wings. Probably modern aircraft, but we don't know yet exactly how that symbol's going to work out. But to a place of protection, nourishment, safety in the wilderness over in the Middle East, in the areas described in Daniel 11, verse 41. All right, to have time for Mr. Armstrong, let's cut to the chase and go to Mr. Armstrong. But boy, next week we're going to talk about that great job that still lies ahead to be done in making the church ready, stirring up the church, getting this church ready for Christ's coming. That is the great job. That's right from the lips of God's end-time apostle, Mr. Armstrong. So, those who have created, manufactured, vanity plate, banana-peeling Church of God groups, they're not going to like this truth from this sermon. That's probably why that sermon's so hard to find. Nobody wants to promote that. Hey, we like deceiving people to think they should be in our little hobnob group over here and helping us replicate the work that Mr. Armstrong was doing, continuing taking the gospel before the world. No, the great job that lies ahead to be done, as Mr. Armstrong himself said it from his own lips, is making the church ready, stirring up the church, getting this church that he described as corrupt, and he had other words for it. And, you know, corrupt is a good choice of words, because the ministers who have started these vanity plate Church of God groups, they did it to elevate themselves and to grab the tithe money or whatever, you know, their motivations were. Or even if it was just a wrong understanding. We got to keep going and doing what Mr. Armstrong was doing and getting the gospel before the world. Well, they're each very ineffectively doing it because of all the division. It's not one great big body doing it like we were when Christ was leading it through Mr. Armstrong. So it's not even an effective work of trying to replicate it. And then somebody ought to stop as we examine ourselves before Passover and say, you know what? Well, this is ineffective, what we're doing. It's just la-di-da. You know, we're just la-di-dying, you know, and dying. We're not really stirred up. We're not doing the great job Mr. Armstrong saw needed to be done that he realized he wasn't able to do. Because as he gave credit to Christ for all the good things that were done in the work, Christ wasn't doing that. That's why we have this delay. And Christ knew he needed to, because people would elevate Mr. Armstrong in a wrong way. I mean, he deserves to be on a pedestal. God makes that clear in Numbers 12 as to how God related to his servant Moses. And Mr. Armstrong is in a greater position than Moses was in, as his end-time apostle, through whom God revealed things that Daniel would have given in his left arm, his right arm, his both legs, whatever, to his, you know, to have known and understood, things that would only be able to be understood in these latter days, after the 5 kings that are fallen had been born and died. You couldn't know who they were before 554 A.D., the first one, and then 1814, the last of them, Napoleon. You couldn't have known who the 5 kings that are fallen were until they had been born and died. The 5 that are fallen. Then the one is, you wouldn't have been able to know who the one is was until 1935. And then by 1945, the one is was over. And now 6 have come and gone. And the other that is yet to come, we're talking about Revelation 17, verse 10, the other that's yet to come, well, none of us know who that is yet. Mr. Armstrong didn't know. He died not being able to see who the 7th king would be. But God may bring Mr. Armstrong back to be one of the 2 witnesses. He may, no problem for God. He resurrected people from the dead. That could happen. And do you notice my word was could? And that's God's option. I'm not saying, Jeff, I think you make some good points out of UK. Jeff, who graduated from Brickett Wood, who says God is going to resurrect Mr. Armstrong to be one of the 2 witnesses. I agree with you, Jeff, that God could do that and might do that. And I'll even tell you, Jeff says that's what God is going to do. But, Jeff, I'm not going as far as you. I'm just telling people what you said, that you believe from Scripture. God will do. God could do that. So don't be shocked if you don't see that gravestone rolled over and the earth all opened up and the casket, there's no bones in that casket anymore because God has resurrected Mr. Armstrong. That could happen. All right, let's hear from God's end-time apostle who will be alive, resurrected for sure when Christ returns, absolutely, and will be over us who are called to the spring harvest, because that's a position God gave as end-time apostle. And if you don't like, if you got a problem with God's end-time apostle, you're not going to be in and part of the first resurrection. You can just forget that altogether. You better make a little attitude adjustment if you've got a problem with God's end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. Let's hear from him. We've got an hour left to go. We may go a few minutes over to hear the whole sermon, but I've got a sermon this morning that I'm going to need to put with I think, let's see. I've got a screen here with Mr. Armstrong's picture. The way I'm going to have to do it is, well, let's see, what happened? I didn't punch. All right, now the subtitles aren't popping up here. I've got a big screen with the subtitles popping up here, but I don't have Mr. Armstrong's picture alongside it. All right, I'll tell you what I'll do. We need to get him rolling. I'll try to find Mr. Armstrong's picture for you as he's talking. But we'll start out with this one screen that pulls the closed captions for those of you that are hard of hearing and told me you want the closed captions. I'll just put the screen with the closed captions up full screen as Mr. Armstrong speaks. And so, all right, I'm going to go ahead and bring that back forward and flip over to the audio player with Mr. Armstrong's sermon in it. God's end-time apostle, Herbert W. Armstrong.
Prior to the Passover, for a few weeks prior, we heard many sermons about examining ourselves, being ready for the Feast of Tabernacles, as the Apostle Paul had directed us in the 11th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Then we came to take the Passover a week ago last night, renewing our acceptance of Jesus' stripes, being beaten with stripes for our physical healing, something I'm afraid we don't take advantage of as we should, but which we could. And that's one of the great advantages that God has given us. It's something extra He doesn't charge for, that He wants to give. And I think He's displeased when we don't take better advantage of it. And then of His shed blood for the remission of our sins, and now for the 7 days of unleavened bread, to picture once again to us the coming out of sin and putting sin out of our lives. So, where are we now? Where do we go from here? The next festival will picture to us the coming of the Holy Spirit. Now, for us of this time, when Jesus Christ has come to start a new world, an entire new civilization, and has called some of us out of this world, which is Satan's world, has said, "Come out from among them of this world and be ye separate." First comes repentance, and then comes belief in Christ, and then comes the promise we shall receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. Now, the next annual festival is a one-day holy day, the day of Pentecost, that will come in, let me see, I guess it's now just over 6 more weeks. After it's 49 days to the 50th day. But let's notice from the 6th chapter of Hebrews, the first 2 verses. Therefore, leaving the principles of the doctrine of Christ, let us go on unto perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, because repentance and faith are the 2 original conditions to receiving God's Spirit, especially for those that God has called. As Peter explained on the day of Pentecost, the promise is to as many as the Lord our God shall call. And as Jesus Christ said, no man could come to him except the Father which sent him draws the person. And so those of us that are called now are drafted. God is not trying to convert Satan's world. He is pulling some out of Satan's world to be specially trained, to be leaders, to be teachers, to be rulers in God's world to come. So many people don't understand what the word gospel means. It means good news. As I've said so many times, Jesus came as a newscaster. He came with news, and it was good news. It was the good news that another world is coming. The kingdom of God is the next world, God's world. This is not God's world, and God is not trying to improve Satan's world for him. He is calling some of us out of this world altogether. It isn't a matter of just anyone who will may come. The one place in the Bible where that expression, whosoever will may come, is in the last chapter of the book of Revelation. And the time setting is long after the millennium and the great white throne judgment, and when Satan is gone and when God is calling everyone to salvation. It does not apply now. Now he continues in verse 2 of the doctrine of baptisms and of the laying on of hands and of the resurrection of the dead and of eternal judgment. So we should go on unto perfection. God is perfection. God is absolutely perfect in every way. Jesus Christ was perfect. No one could point out one thing that Jesus had ever done contrary to God's law, God's commandments, or what God had taught and the way of God. Again, the very last words in Peter's letter, 2 Peter. We should grow now in grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Now you can't put sin out of your life without putting righteousness in. Once again, I've mentioned the bottle. It doesn't necessarily have to be a milk bottle, any kind of a bottle. Let's say that the bottle is filled with some very dark, ugly, and poisonous liquid. And you want to empty it out, like we must empty ourselves of sin and get sin out of our lives. You can't get that polluted liquid out of the bottle without letting something else go in, because the bottle is not going to be a vacuum. For every little cubic centimeter or whatever you would call it that goes out, an equal amount of air will have to come in, or something to take the place of it. We can't put sin out of our lives without putting God's righteousness in to replace it. And sometimes the way to get sin out is to put righteousness in, and it will just force the sin out. That is the best way to put sin out of your life. Now, the festivals of God show the completion of creation of man. I have said so many times that God, I won't say he always does, but so far as I can see and think of just now, in every case, God creates in dual stages. I've said that he didn't finish the creation of angels until character had been established in them, and each individual angel had to make his own choice, had to make a decision before that character could come into him. He had his own part in that process. And man was not completed at the time of the creation of Adam. He created man, but we read back here in Genesis, the 2nd chapter, and beginning with verse 18. And the eternal God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make an help meet for him," or competent for him. And out of the ground, the eternal God had formed every beast of the field, every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called them, every living creature, had called every living creature, that was the name thereof. Now that certainly implies that God said to Adam, "I want you to name them." One thing I'd like to call your attention to right here, I don't see here any rebellion in Adam as yet. I don't see any resentment against God, any hostility. He didn't say, "Oh, go do it yourself." He didn't say, "Well, why should I do it? Let someone else do it." No, Adam just went ahead and did it. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam, there was not found an help meet or fit for him, adequate for him. And the eternal God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. And that's what they do before you they give you an operation in a hospital. They give you a deep sleep with an anesthetic, so that Adam didn't feel what was going on. And he slept, upon Adam, and he slept, and God took one of Adam's ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof, and the rib which the eternal God had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she hath been taken out of man." So Adam even went on to name her and give the name woman. "Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Adam was not complete. God wanted him to reproduce. No man can do that by himself. So he made a woman. Now there were two, and he brought them together, and the two became one. But one what? Not one spirit. They became one flesh. Now man's physical creation was complete. Just his physical creation. However, the spiritual creation is what God is really doing. And he's starting by making man a sort of a clay model that'll be changed into spirit later on. Physical creation complete, but the spiritual creation had not. Now Adam was mortal. I read so many times Genesis 2 verse 7 that God formed man of the dust of the ground. Now he was made in the image of God, in the form and shape of God. In that sense he was different from other animals. But he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, just the same as he did in animals. and man became a living nephesh, or soul. And animals had also become living nephesh. Only in the King James translation, they translated it 3 times in Genesis 1, that animals had become living creatures. They came to the same Hebrew word referring to man, and they called it soul. And that's because the ones who did the translating into English still believe Satan's lie that we are immortal souls. But it doesn't mean immortal, it just means a physical being. The dust of the ground became a soul. Now, Adam only had a temporary chemical or physical life. His life was limited, and was limited to breathing air and the circulation of blood. But God is immortal. God has eternal life. In him is life, self-containing life, inherent life. And God offered that to Adam through the tree of life. Now, once again, there are the 2 trees. And if I mention it, someone's going to get up and walk out and say, well, there's Mr. Armstrong getting back to those 2 trees. You betcha. And I'm going to do it again and again and again, because you can't understand salvation. You can't understand what Christ is doing. You can't understand the church. You can't understand the world or what's wrong with it. You can't understand anything unless you understand the lesson of those 2 trees and the incident of the forbidden fruit. One was the tree of life. That was freely offered to him. The other was the tree of self-knowledge, taking to himself the knowledge of good and evil. Now, that had nothing to do with knowledge of building a house, of knowledge of making clothes to wear, knowledge of food to eat, or physical things. Or later on, as mankind advanced, knowledge to make automobiles, railroad trains, airplanes, spacecraft, computers, the many marvelous machines that we make today. Good and evil does not give you knowledge to do any of those things. Good and evil is knowledge merely of a relationship with, dealing with other minds. And it's the spirit in the mind that gives the attitude, and it has to do then with spiritual knowledge and spiritual attitudes. Attitudes of love or of hate, of cooperation or of competition. Attitudes of give and cooperate and serve and help, or attitudes of get and take away, and of animosity. It has to do with right and wrong. So God forbade him to take this kind of knowledge to himself. God had made man with a mind that was not complete. Now, man's creation physically was not complete until God had made a wife for him. But his creation spiritually and mentally was not complete, and is not yet. And the spiritual creation of man is still going on. And our spiritual creation is not yet complete. We've just come to the place in the annual holy days, and they picture the spiritual creation. We have just come to the place now of having repented of sin, having accepted Christ and his sacrifice for the remission of sins, and as our Savior, through whom we may receive eternal life from God the Father. We haven't even come to the place in the annual holy days that picture the coming of the Holy Spirit. And so that creation is still going on, is not even complete yet. Now, the tree of self-knowledge, of trying to take just to himself the knowledge of right and wrong, spiritual knowledge, and spiritual knowledge has to do with what life is all about. Why God created man, why he put us here, where we're going, what is the purpose of life, what is our objective. If man was to be made into God, and that is God's purpose, he's reproducing himself. But what is God now? God is supreme mind and spiritual character. It took supreme power to create matter. There was a time when there was no such thing as matter. There was no earth, there was no sun, there were no galaxies, no universe, nothing physical whatsoever. Only God and the Word. And then next God created spirit beings or angels. And they are spirit and invisible to human eyes. They're not matter. But God has supreme mind. He was able to first design angels, what form and shape they would be, design their minds. But the one thing God couldn't do was to create character within them. You see, character is something we have a share in. And no one knows that better than God. So when he created Adam, the tree of life simply meant spiritual mind, spiritual knowledge of God and God's purposes, and spiritual righteous character, perfection of character. That's what God is. And he's making God out of us. He is reproducing himself out of us. Now, if the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was going to result in death, I think we could call that the tree of death. But it was a knowledge tree of a certain kind of materialistic knowledge. Now, it also had a certain spiritual type of knowledge, but it was not God's type of spirit. A human mind, a carnal mind, can have good aspirations. A carnal mind can have a high sense of morality. He can have good intentions. He has attitudes, either good or bad. But there is one difference. He has only this human spirit within him. And the human spirit is intensely selfish. Now, I said a while ago, Adam did not at first show anything evil. God told him to name the animals, and he did. And he submitted when God put him into the deep sleep, and he accepted the wife that God made for him. That shows that what we call human nature was not created in Adam. God did not create something evil in Adam. Something evil got into Adam, but it was not created there at first by God. And we have to go back to these two trees to understand some of these things. The tree of life now meant the Holy Spirit of God, and that meant the love of God shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Spirit, Romans 5:5. That's a kind of love God did not put in Adam when he first created him. Adam was capable of exercising a certain love, but it was a selfish love. When Eve became a mother of Cain, I think she loved Cain. And we think of mother love as being about the highest form of love. Well, it's only the highest form, if it is the highest form, of carnal love. But it is selfish in nature. Because that child was her child. That child came out of her. It was hers, belonged to her. She had to take care of it. And we always seem to be in favor of what is ours. Now, maybe it's our basketball team or our football team, but we're for it and we're against the team that is against it. And that's a type of selfish attachment and selfish love. And that's the only kind of love that Adam was competent or capable of. Now, if he had taken the tree of life, he would have received the love of God. God would then, but Adam had to make that decision. That is the kind of love which in us does certain things. First of all, the Spirit of God impregnates with immortal, self-containing, inherent life, which Adam did not have. Secondly, the Spirit of God opens the mind to understand spiritual knowledge and spiritual attitudes and spiritual sense of right and wrong, which the normal carnal human mind cannot understand to that extent. The Holy Spirit is much more than that. The Holy Spirit is the love of God, and love is the fulfilling of the law. Once you understand what the law of God is, it is love toward God with all your mind, heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, man doesn't have the kind of love that will do that. The people in this world with high aspirations, with a good sense of morals, high ethics, everything of that kind in business, usually they don't care anything about God. They don't know anything about the things God has in store for us. They don't have the love of God. They just simply have what we would call good character from just the human point of view, because they have the human spirit within them. The spirit of the tree of life meant a spiritual mind that could acquire spiritual knowledge that God has in store for us, and God's purposes and what God plans, and of spiritual character, till we could become perfect like God. So you see, both trees were trees of knowledge. One was knowledge that can come only by the human spirit within man. The other was knowledge that comes by the Spirit of God. So man's part in his spiritual creation begins with man making a choice. He has to, what Adam had to do was to reject Satan and Satan's way and accept eternal life from God, and would be accepting the knowledge that God would reveal. And through the Holy Spirit in him would open up his mind to comprehend and understand what God was revealing. Then that would give him the love to fulfill the law. It would give him the faith to rely on God. It would give him the spirit of power. It would give him so many things that he lacked, and that every child born ever since has lacked as they were born. Now Adam yielded to Satan and to Eve. Sin had not entered Adam until he yielded to Satan. I'd like to just show you something now. Once again, let's go over this from the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field that the eternal God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? In other words, he right away is belittling God and accusing God of being selfish and taking everything to himself. Didn't he held something back, didn't he? He didn't give it all to you, did he? Well, the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now watch how Satan goes to work. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. In other words, God is deceiving you. You can't believe God. You can't rely on God. He started to discredit God. He started to cause doubt about God. You know, I've noticed that in the church, some that haven't been members too long will come and say, Well, I've got questions. Questions mean they have doubts, that they're doubting God, and they're doubting God's truth. They're doubting the Bible. Now, if they're really honest, sometimes we explain their doubts, and they see it, and that's just fine. They go right along. And they remain loyal, and they grow in grace and knowledge. But sometimes they're critical, and they're just trying to find something wrong, and they refuse to see anything that is right. You shall not surely die, for God does know. He already knows this. He's deceived you. He knows that in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes will be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Now it's when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it really was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes. Now it began to appeal to her sense of sight, one of the physical senses. It was desired. A desire for something beautiful came into her, and for the taste of good food. Desired to make one wise, and that appealed to intellectual vanity. She began to think what she could do with her mind. What is this power in me I find suddenly created? I'd better use it. She took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. And then something happened to both of them. Something happened to their minds. They had made a choice of self-centeredness, of selfishness. They wanted what looked good to them. They denied God. First, Satan destroyed God's credibility and the authority of God. You can't rely on God. God has no authority. Now, the Bible is merely God speaking. And the biggest church that professes to be Christian in this world says, and its top cardinals have said, and I think this has come from Rome, the Bible is not a sufficient guide to heaven, as they say. Well, heaven isn't what God has promised us anyway. But they assume that. So at first he had to try to destroy the credibility of God and the authority of God. Secondly, he appealed to intellectual vanity, to make man feel he's superior to God, till man would look down on God. Now, I want you to see how that has come through the centuries down to our time. That's where it started. You have to go back to find how we got to be that way. It started that way. That was the foundation of this world, and this world is Satan's world. Today, universities feel that they are very superior to God's college. Practically every student, I think that there may be one or two exceptions, but on the whole, the students who have been to Ambassador College and then gone to one of the universities for higher degrees have come to look askance at Ambassador College. They become ashamed of it. It's not on the high level of this scientific university. And didn't we all used to feel that way? Frankly, I awakened to the fact that I think I did. We weren't quite as good as they were. They were intellectual. I know in the early days when we had two students here who had master's degrees from Oxford University. We had others from other universities. Northwestern University, I think from Harvard, or one from Yale. And we used to try to advertise that fact to show how good we were, that we even had students from those fine colleges. You see, they were way up there, and that seemed to elevate us. I look back with shame on that now. We were higher than they were all along, but we didn't seem to know it. We hadn't advanced that far in the knowledge of God. Today in the world, fundamental religion, even though they're wrong, those that are fundamentalists are those that claim to believe the Bible. There's the Bible Belt down in Kentucky and Tennessee in that area. And they're generally looked on with contempt by the educated people of the world. They're looked on as ignorant. God is ignorant. That's the psychology that Satan has generated in this world. If you believe in God, there's something wrong with your mind. And the only thing that is wrong is that their minds are only half there. God made the human mind only half there. It had one human spirit. And the human mind is human brain plus human spirit. But it isn't complete. God made it to need another spirit, the Spirit of God. And the Spirit of God coming with the spirit of man in the mind, just like the male and the female became one physically, then they become one spiritually and mentally. And man is not complete, is not all there even mentally until he receives the Spirit of God. And he can't have the Spirit of God holding God in contempt. He's got to look on God as the supreme authority. He's got to recognize the supreme credibility of God Almighty and of Jesus Christ. When Jesus was on earth, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, They were the mighty men. They were the scholarly, so they thought. They tried to show how ignorant Jesus was, so they asked him trick questions to back him into a corner. But somehow they always found that he made sort of monkeys out of them. Maybe he caused them to believe in evolution. At least their descendants have come to believe in it. But sin had not entered into the minds of Adam or Eve until they yielded to Satan. And so human nature is that nature that entered in when they accepted Satan instead of God, and God closed off the tree of life, or the Holy Spirit. Bible fundamentalism is ridiculed in intellectual circles today and those of higher education. It is ridiculed in the newspapers. It is ridiculed on television. Do you think that with God's truth that I could get time on NBC or CBS or ABC and their network? They ought to just willingly give time all three networks and let the people know the truth. But no, I would have no credibility with them. They think that the truth of God is so much foolishness. Now, we find it over here. I hadn't intended to read this, but let's turn to 1 Corinthians 2. They have their language of scholarship today. But Paul said, beginning with verse 6, 1 Corinthians 2, howbeit we speak the wisdom among them that are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world, not in the language of scholarship, not of the princes of this world that come to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery because they don't understand it. They cannot understand it without the Holy Spirit. So they just say it's so much foolishness. Now let's read on, I'll show you. Even the hidden mystery, the hidden wisdom, that is, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world. Now, princes in this case not only means a prince who might become a king someday, but it means the leaders. That could mean commercial, industrial leaders and political leaders and leaders in all lines of thought, education and everything. None of the princes of this world knew. They don't have that kind of knowledge. But had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart or the mind of man the things that God has prepared for them that love him. What is the real plan? What does God have in mind? Where are we going? What's going to happen in the future? Why did God put humanity on the earth? Look, humanity's all against God. Poor God. Is there anything he can do about that? They don't know what his real plan and program is. They're blinded to it. They can't know. But God hath revealed them unto us. Who revealed it? The Holy Spirit? No. God has revealed it unto us. How? By his Spirit that dwells in us. The Spirit didn't reveal it. God did. But the Holy Spirit opened our mind to comprehend what God revealed, so that we can understand. Now, it says, for what man knows even the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him. A cow doesn't have that spirit. A cow can't understand human knowledge. A cow can't understand physics and chemistry and astronomy. It can't understand music, art, literature. And they don't have the attitudes of good and evil that man has, because they lack the spirit of man. And man wouldn't have that knowledge except by the human spirit that is in him. Even so, the things of God, what God has in store for us, and the plans of God, knoweth no man but the Spirit of God. We can understand if we have the Spirit of God, for God reveals it. How does he reveal? The Bible is his word. It's revealed right here. Now we read on. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, nor the attitude of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know, that is, come to knowledge, the things that are freely given to us by God, which things also we speak, not in words of which man's wisdom teaches, not in scholarly language, but which the Holy Spirit teaches, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man, the ordinary carnal mind, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. Without the Holy Spirit, you can't come to know it. The Holy Spirit gives you the power to comprehend, to discern, to understand the truth that God reveals. He reveals it to us down today in the Bible, which is God's Word in writing. The educators of this world don't understand. Last Friday, I talked to a group of people down at the University of Southern California in the law school in a meeting of a certain scholarship or a chair that's established by the Ambassador Foundation in my name. And there was quite a ceremony. In fact, they said this was one of the very highlights and keystones of the whole history of the university. And they had two professors who will be on that scholarship there who gave speeches. And the president of the university made a speech. He said some very nice things about me. And then I said a few words. I told them that when I was 5 years old, my father had said that when I grew up I would be a Philadelphia lawyer. Now, of course, when I was 5 years old, what I wanted to be when I grew up was a streetcar motorman. I'd get up front and watch the motorman drive and handle his car, and that intrigued me, and that's what I wanted. Well, I asked my father so many, as he called it, crazy fool questions that he got tired of answering why this and how that, and I wanted to know how and why all the time. I wanted understanding, and I wanted him to explain so I could understand. He said I'd be a Philadelphia lawyer, sure enough, when I grew up. Well, I said that I was challenged finally at age 34 on a point of law. Now, all of you are interested in law here in this law school, the University of Southern California. I was challenged on a point of law, and I had to examine a certain textbook. It's a textbook that I fear is not used very extensively in the law school. It's a law book, however, and it's called the Holy Bible. And you know, I discovered that that book gives instruction about law from beginning to end, and it's quite a thick book. And I said, all of the laws that we have, constitutional law, the Constitution of the United States, and deciding law as to whether it is constitutional and in accordance with the Constitution, it all emanates from that book. And that book sets the principle. And whenever law deviates from that book, it is not administering justice. And it is not administering truth. Because I said that is the criterion. And that is where all law really emanates from. And I said that I became, in time, the Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God. And the work has grown around the world, a lot larger than our physical size. And I have found that in this great law book called the Holy Bible, that it says that sin is evil, and everything that we punish people for in the courts of law is the transgression of the law. But that is God's law. But I find that the real author of the book, Jesus Christ, gave a history of the future of the church in the second and third chapters of the book of Revelation, sometimes called the Apocalypse in Roman Catholic circles. And I said there, he showed what would happen, the chief characteristics of the church in the various eras from that time until now. And I said, it happens that we're in the era called the Philadelphia era. Now, sin is the transgression of the law, and I do a lot of teaching and preaching about law and transgressing the law. And I try to show people how to avoid lawyers and judges by not breaking the law. But I happen to be a law teacher in the Philadelphia era, so I guess my father was right after all. I have become a Philadelphia lawyer. Now, I don't know whether they thought I was a lunatic or what they thought, but I think some of them began to think that went over a little bit. And I know that several expressions were heard in the audience. They really got something new they never thought of before. Now, into such a world that Satan has gotten into that condition came Jesus Christ. He was begotten by God, not by a human father. But he was human, and he came and started in this world. And he started the church. Now, the church is merely another world. This world was founded in the time of Satan, and when God shut off the Holy Spirit, and men had no access now to the Spirit of God, they developed a world based on the spirit of man. And the world grew not wanting knowledge from God. As a matter of fact, they sort of fear God in a sense. Not that they look with God as a terrorist, but they're afraid that they might have to get righteous. And so they're sort of afraid of God because he might tell them they're wrong, and they don't want to be told they're wrong. The hardest thing in the world is to admit you're wrong, and they don't want that. But Jesus came not to reform or to convert the world of Satan and Satan's world or Satan. He came to start a new and different world, such as Adam should have started. He came to also confirm the promises made to the fathers. Now, this morning we heard quite a sermon from Dr. Hay about the promises. You'll find a great deal about those same promises in the book, The United States in Prophecy, United States and Britain in Prophecy, and the Old Covenant made with Israel, and the New Covenant that will be made. Now, the Old Covenant formed Israel as a nation. That was a physical nation, and that's as far as God has gone in the creation of man so far. They're all just physical and human. The New Covenant will be a spiritual covenant that will form the nation, the kingdom of God. It'll be a spiritual kingdom. All of those will be God in the same sense that Jesus Christ is God. He is the firstborn of many brethren, and he was born God by a resurrection from the dead, as you read in the first 5 verses of Romans, the first chapter.
All right, brethren, we got to stop right there. Our time is nearly up for our 2 hours this morning. So I want to thank you for joining us. We're going to sing a hymn before we close up, though. And just a reminder, as I set forward to the hymn, that the Passover memorial will be a week from this Thursday night. That'll be April 18, after sunset, Thursday night, 1 week from this Thursday. And then the night to be much observed will be the Friday night following that. That'll be a week from this Friday night. So you may want to make your plans for who you're going to fellowship with for night to be much observed. And definitely between now, not today, but sometime between now and a week from Thursday, as soon as you can, pick up your box of unleavened matzos, your unleavened crackers for the Passover service. Okay, let's go with one thing that'll be very relative to Days of Unleavened Bread, putting sin out of our lives. Psalm number 1, blessed and happy is the man who never walks astray. Let's sing that together to conclude this service today. Everybody, come on, pitch in and sing. All he does prospers well, but the wicked are not so. They are chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. Verse 3, he shall be a tree that grows, planted by the riverside, which in season yields its fruit, green its leaves above. Everybody on the chorus now. All he does prospers well, but the wicked are not so. They are chaff before the wind, driven to and fro. All right. Thank you, everybody who sang along with us. And that's it for our service for today, this 6th day of April 2019 on the pagan Roman calendar, the first day of the first month, brand new year, 13 days away now to the 14th of the first month for the Passover foot washing service. We've got to sign off. I'm going to wish you all a very happy Sabbath. If you missed the Bible study last night, please be sure and go look for that in our archive on cogtv.org, sabbath.tv, and be sure and listen to last night's service. Friends, until next time, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath, again, thank you for joining us for the service today. We'll see you next Friday night Bible study here on Sabbath TV, Sunday night, tomorrow night through Thursday on World Watch TV with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy.